This episode is brought to you by Polestar, a car brand designing a future that's 100% electric. Polestar is saying no for all the right reasons. No empty promises, because Polestar turns visions into reality. No greenwashing, because their words are set in stone. No conquering Mars, because Earth is their priority. No compromises, because the planet deserves real action. Get the full story and explore the Polestar 2 at polestar.com.
The New World Order does not want you to hear this episode.
It doesn't. It
does
really
not.
Doesn't.
It's
You
too
know
late.
why?
All right.
They're afraid of it.
There's a great quote on this for this
Afraid of
episode,
the
Marie. You
truth.
ready?
I'm ready.
All right. The main thing that I learned about conspiracy theory is that conspiracy theorists believe in a conspiracy because that is more comforting. The truth of the world is that it is actually chaotic. The truth is that it's not the Illuminati or the Jewish banking conspiracy or the gray alien theory. The truth is far more frightening. Nobody is in control. The world is rudderless. Said by Alan Moore, and totally true in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's even scary, but again, it's coming from Alan Moore.
So scary.
Right?
And
That's some dark sentiment coming from old Alan.
It's a little dark. All right. So Marie, last episode, we ended with the question I think on all of our listeners' minds, which is, all right, so listen, we've had like 3 hours almost of discussions about this goddamn airport. Why the hell would the Illuminati
Longer
choose an
than most
airport?
flights.
Why did this airport become the center of this conspiracy theory?
Yes, why an airport?
And it's time we answered them. Okay, Marie, it's finally time for the long-awaited answer.
Of why an airport?
Why an airport?
I mean, I do think that it's a good question to ask, because it's not like the pyramids, right? It's not like ancient aliens or, some other big historical artifact that you think would be more likely to be associated with conspiracies.
No, this is a place where you go to have, Five Guys and then get diarrhea on your flight to Tampa.
Well, strangely specific, but yes, yes, that, right? I mean, it's, and so while Denver International Airport was, again, one of the first of its kind to make a huge investment in art and bringing art into the airport, that doesn't change the fact that it's a really kind of a dull, large building of cement and concrete, and is made for just the single purpose of getting people from one place to another. I mean, there's nothing more to it. And I think it's just really strange that is what people think of now, still, like more than 20 years since this whole conspiracy theory got started. It's lasted.
It's a really interesting thing because Denver International Airport was sort of the beginning of the age of really mundane conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists, I would say. So, Marie, you mentioned, like ancient alien ideas or, ideas that like, the Freemasons built Washington, D.C. to look like a, giant whatever pentagram or whatever the hell it is. And there's obelisks and all these other things, right? This idea of like this idea of a group of rich, powerful, and connected people in a club that you're not part of, making the decisions for everybody. Like, number one, that's just the truth, right? Like, that is just truth. Like, that happens, but we just call it government, Like, that's just like, the Harvard and Yale graduating classes every year, those are those people, right?
Yep.
And,
yep.
So there's an interesting side to this where, on the one side of the conspiracy theory, it's like, why the hell are you looking at an airport, bro? Go to look. What are you doing? Why are you looking at the art in this stupid airport? There's go vote, right? Run for office. There's real shit happening,
There's real shit happening.
But on the other hand, though, it also speaks to the really there's this idea that we touch on in a lot of our series, and it is about sort of the de-weaponizing or the de-toothing, I guess, of conspiracy theory or just transgressive thought in theory, right? In kind of general. So, you know, the one that we always kind of go back to a lot, because me and Marie are, you know, like old, crusty, like, you know, angry old punks, is, you know, punk rock culture getting kind of co-opted by like Hot Topic, right?
Yes,
The same, and, you know, so culture and these cultural trends that could be dangerous to the system or could be challenging to the system being, you know, taken and sold back to you and made into something that, like, you know, your mom talks about, right? You know, suddenly your mom is woke. And it's like, well, crap, there's no, you know, there's no way to get rid of the
Mom's
threat.
wearing a safety pin through her ear.
What's the, like, but seriously though, right? There's no, you know, it's like that old joke, right? That, like, you know, well, how do you get your kid to stop doing, you know, the cool thing that you don't want them to do? Like, you do it, right?
You
so
do it.
you want your kid to stop smoking, you start smoking, and, you know, talking to them about it, whatever. You know, it's that one might not work. You might both get addicted to nicotine, but, you know, it doesn't work as good for like heroin, I guess. But you know, the idea still stands.
Yes.
And with conspiracy theory, I kind of think like we're in this weird world right now where, you know, that group of people who are controlling you politically and economically and everything else, they've figured out that, hey, conspiracy theories is a really great fucking way to control people. It's a great way to trick people, right? So we'll just use it. We're just going to use it for them. Right. And so we're hitting an interesting point, though. So that's one idea, I guess, of the danger of conspiracy theory, or kind of the transgressive nature of conspiracy theory being eaten up by the system and kind of pooped back at you, and you know, Giorgio Tsoukalos serving it to you on a spoon, on a platter or whatever. But there's also an interesting part of this, which is the place for conspiracy theory to exist, and kind of the power of the theory to explain things gets smaller and smaller the longer that it kind of exists in the world around us. So we talk about that a lot when it comes to, like, say, magic, right? Where if you think about like what a ghost used to be 200 years ago, if you were to think what you would see if you saw a ghost, you would think a full body apparition who could like move things maybe and talk to you and interact with you and have really, you know, really physical presence.
Levitate the table.
Yeah. All that good stuff. And today, when people think about ghosts, they think about, like, you know, nerds with stud finders scaring each other in haunted prisons.
Yes.
You know, that's what they think about.
Haunted prisons. Yep.
So the place for the ghost to exist, the importance of the idea, what a ghost means, has really shrunk from being like a person's soul to being like a electronic signal or a hot spot in a room.
Yeah. And even to be televised, right? It's the commodity.
Yes. And it's been commodified.
It's the commodity. Yeah. Not that it wasn't 100 years ago with like seances and all that kind of stuff, but it definitely has shrunk. Well,
you know, you had to go to like dangerous, you know, not dangerous, but like you had to go to like a weird carnival ground to talk to somebody, or go to like a traveling caravan, or go to a seedy part of town, you know, to get your psychic reading or whatever. Now you can you go to someone's blog and they'll tell you whatever the hell, right? So it totally changes.
No, there's an app.
Right, there's an app for that.
There's an app for that.
With conspiracy theory, though, we've kind of gotten to this point now where conspiracy theory stopped being these really long-ranging, deep conspiracies of control and really powerful and dangerous and whatever, to kind of just being like stuff that you can change by like filling out the right forms, you know, or like having a law degree and like knowing the law well. Like when did it become the case that like a lawyer could change what the deep state of the government could do?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any damn sense.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you're bringing up, like, it's like the bureaucracy, right? Like now the conspiracy has been so pulverized in some way. It's about the bureaucracy, right? Which is basically the most boring thing on the face of the planet, right?
The worst thing.
If you look at any kind, you look at C-SPAN, you look at like, you know, again, like, general technical writing around certain, governmental procedures and parliamentary procedures. And that stuff is really dry and really straightforward. It was supposed to be really dry and really straightforward, right? It's instructional. It's not supposed to be conspiratorial. But you start going into the footnotes and stuff, and that's where you can start to pull, that's what it's kind of come to, is like the origins for so much more conspiracy are rooted in sort of the mistrust of that understanding of things that are boring.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting.
Kind of like why an airport?
Exactly.
It's like it's bland enough that it's enough of an oatmeal that you can get something, you can plant something. It's a terrible metaphor, but you get what I'm saying. There's enough blandness there that you can try and cultivate something that is equally like of a blanket statement conspiracy theory, right? So you got an airport, you got this big, boring airport. And I think the thing that's most interesting about it is the conspiracy theory that works the best with it is the blanket statement of conspiracy theories, which is the New World Order. Absolutely.
And it's so interesting because, again, so the New World Order conspiracy really started out as a real, like, people were really concerned about it. Like, people thought this was really real. Like today, some people think it's real, right? Like your
deep state.
Yeah, your wacky uncle thinks that it's real and whatever and everything else, right? And it's like pushed on, anyways, whatever. But the idea of a new world order, again, is sort of this idea of like there is a real powerful and not only powerful, but a very well organized and secretive group of possibly Lucifer worshiping or like devil worshiping or whatever, pagan, something non-Christian group of people who are guiding the world around us. And it started out as being this idea of like, there were real hidden symbols and it was, there was no way for you to contact them. And like a real, again, really what we think about secret societies,
Yes.
versus say today where these ideas of conspiracy theory, like conspiracy theorists today, they're not looking for like grand designs and whatever. They're like checking to see the Freedom of Information Act documents to make sure that like, some congressman did the right forms or something. It's just, again, it's boring bureaucracy. So the airport becomes a perfect symbol of this age of boring conspiracies, I guess, really. I mean, pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's sort of this blank slate, right? And again, when I say blank slate, that's really where they're able to tie the New World Order back to the airport, is the commemorative plaque that was put in place when the airport was opened, which basically, again, since this airport, brand new, very, very expensive, had to have a lot of financial backing from the government and from private sources. So how do you get the community, local government, and deep pockets all engaged, to give you money to build this airport? Is you need some sort of a financial mechanism, a group of people that are going to help you get the word out and actually get the money and fundraise. And that group for the building of the airport was called the New World Airport Commission.
Bum, 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 bum.
Right? Which, again, totally nefarious. Well,
Terrible name.
It is the fact
it's
that
unlucky. It's unlucky.
The fact that it is such a bad name should denote why it's not a conspiracy, because it is such a, it's just basically the name that I think that they came up with to sign the thank you cards and to put on the plaque, which was, well, we can't each sign our individual name because there's like 25 of them. So we'll just be the New World Airport Commission. It is a new world for us. We've just built this airport and we are a commission, right? Again, bureaucracy.
It's honestly like you deciding to call your You deciding to call your new pizza place Pizzagate. It's terrible.
Because you
it's
have to walk
it's
into
so
the
unlucky.
little garden.
So stupid.
But it's perfect because it is this entire, again, you have this one thing that people can come back to, but is sort of the linchpin is, you got the wacky art. You have other weird events. You've got this whole big budget, it's this boondoggle, but really what ties it is that plaque.
And like, it sounds stupid. And I know there's listeners out there who are like, that is unsatisfying as an answer. That is literally, I think, the answer. The reason that it's this airport is because they chose a stupid name. Because if you watch, the thing is too, what's so funny is if you watch the documentaries about this or the YouTube channels or whatever, this is always given as like the last piece of evidence. They're like, and then finally the capstone at the airport is titled with the New World Airport Commission, which is 2 words similar to New World Order. And therefore, like, it is the thing that is given as like, this is the kill shot, right? The director was like, man, this is really going to get him with this.
Yeah.
It's dumb. It's boring. It is mundane. It's just uncreative decision making has ruined more things in this country, Marie, than.
But what's good about it is one size fits all, right? And I think my favorite quote about the New World Order, which we're going to get into, because we've discussed it a little bit in the past, but like the phrase actually has a history, was journalist and professor Hua Su writes that the New World Order is not so much a single plot as it is a way of reading history.
Absolutely.
It's the New World Order isn't just one event or one string of events. It is a lens in which you can read anything that's going on in your world and at your time, including a very boring but large municipal building. It
is the conspiracy theory.
Yes.
It's almost like at the root of all conspiracy theories, right? Because we talked last episode about all these complicated, what are the conspiracy theories like and how do we categorize them? How do we study them? Whatever. At the end of the day, the New World Order conspiracy theory really is it's just you asking yourself who benefits so many times that you literally give yourself like an aneurysm. I mean, like you literally who benefits yourself into stupidity, essentially. So the idea goes back since forever, right? It's at its core the idea of people in power are making decisions around me that I have no control over. And I can imagine a scenario where bad people would get into those positions of power and then use their money, their influence, their political connections, their whatever, to change things in a way that benefits them specifically. Which is not a crazy. Anyone that's been on like a PTA board or in a team project before in school knows that like that's not that crazy.
Anybody who works for corporate America knows. Yes, that's within realm. That is exactly a half hour away in this meeting.
It's not that nuts, right? No. People manipulate other people. People do things for their own benefit. People are, a lot of the time people are selfish, right? So it's not crazy to think that could in theory happen. Where it starts to get a little bit more interesting, really, is when we start getting to around the 1700s, late 1600s, early 1700s, when international politics really becomes a thing. Suddenly, when people are able to travel around the world in the time in a normal amount of time where decisions can get done at a global scale, that's really where it starts. It's really where it starts taking off.
Yes. But I mean, also the idea of the phrase and the idea of like New World Order was not meant to always have a bad connotation.
No, not
right?
at all. Absolutely.
That's what I think is sort of interesting as well. Like the idea of it again is New World Order kind of speaks to this idea of a connected globe, right? So like you were saying, we finally, you begin to travel more, you begin to, there's more, you have more awareness outside of your proximity. And as such, governments, leadership, even individual thought, and especially commerce, trade, finance begins to move towards of a global centralism, right? It's I can ship my goods. I can get stuff from other places. I'm exposed to new ideas, but also I'm going to come into conflict. My country is going to come into conflict with other countries. So this idea of the New World Order was also really centered around the idea of war and warfare and what happens when, nations have to all of a sudden choose sides.
Yeah. And really this, again, it becomes an issue in kind of the world consciousness really with World War One. Because before World War One, like Europe was going to war every like 10 years with itself, right? Mm-hmm. America was relatively still young, but even America had a pretty great track record of like fighting within ourselves, fighting native peoples, fighting beavers in Canada, like,
fighting ourselves
again, like
people, fighting the environment. Yep.
Right. Like so it's, in a world where every 10 years there's like a skirmish or even a major conflict, almost a war kind of, it means something different when you're fighting with like muskets and swords and bayonets than when you're fighting with like artillery shells. And so World War One is really where that changes. War goes from being this almost, there's a really interesting, the best podcast series of all time is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Mm-hmm. And I think the best series he ever did was on World War One. And especially because it's a war that I didn't know anything about practically. Like every history teacher I've ever had, I think this is just true of like Americans in general, every history teacher ever is just like, World War One happened. Who gives a crap? Let's get to the Nazis. Let's talk about how we kicked the Nazis in the pants. That's like the thing people want to get to.
Let's get to the Nazis.
Yeah, that's the thing people want to get to, right? But World War One, it's this moment where terrible. Like we went from, again, fighting each other with like bayonets and musket fire, which like wasn't really, like it didn't really kill that many people and whatever. It wasn't that deadly, to like Tommy guns and missiles
and tanks and missiles.
Yeah, right. Like real war, artillery shells.
Well, the Great War, right? That's what it was.
Absolutely. So we went from it went from being like you would, like decimation, losing a tenth of your core of people, of your like military unit, used to mean something really important. I mean, it still is important, obviously, but like World War One, entire armies were getting obliterated.
Yeah, and I think you're also, things are becoming televised, right? You're beginning, the civilian population is also at stake. They're seeing, the results of war, both
media
in destruction and in media, and having family, killed. It's I think it is, and it's happening on a global level. It's happening, that's, I think, the thing that again, there was the big, clearly the big differentiation.
Absolutely. And so what ends up happening really is after World War One, Woodrow Wilson devises basically a plan that says, okay, well, we're going to create an order of nations that'll be this international this international government really, which will hopefully lead to an end to warfare. And the idea really was every member state would be politically independent, but they would each work together to support each other's independence. They would have kind of united action against bad actors, and they would trade with each other.
Yes.
And so really it's the precursor to to NATO, to other groups of countries working together like this. It's the precursor to the United Nations, although the League of Nations is thought as kind of a failure today. It's a really important idea, but this is the nugget from which New World Order conspiracy theory will grow and spread. This is the seed.
Yes.
And so what we end up happening now is not only does it seem like okay, in your local town, maybe there's like a corrupt sheriff, or there's a corrupt mayor, or there's a family that seems to run everything or whatever. Now it's governments, like the entire country is corrupt, maybe. Right?
Yeah, and that you're, again, like if you are if you're coming out of World War I on the losing end of it, right, and you're seeing sort of other governments band together or re-strengthen one another, there's going to be sort of this idea of mistrust, right? If I am not engaged in it, or even if I'm engaged in it, but I don't feel like I'm getting an equal share, or I feel like, World War II has weakened my country so much and we deserve more, and that is not being addressed. I mean, it's just the idea of like, we're going to bring everyone together and naturally is going to sow seeds of mistrust.
Absolutely. So,
and
absolutely.
Dissent,
absolutely.
And
so what
you get, go ahead.
No, so what you end up having happen then is, like Marie said, so World War I ends. Germany is completely stripped of its kind of might, right? And humiliated on the world stage and whatever, and the people in Germany start wondering, like, well, what the hell, man? Like, what, these countries used to be our friends, and I thought war was like this honorable way that you fought to get what you wanted. Now we're the bad guys because we fought in a war? Because we fought for what we wanted, what we believed in. I thought war was just the thing that happened, right? So it's kind of a shift, right? And so the German people, a portion of the German people, starts to kind of build toward this conspiracy theory that, well, there has to have been someone inside of Germany that was working against us.
Yeah.
Right. There was some other group maybe that stopped Germany from reaching its full potential. And so then you have, obviously the leader of that kind of way of thinking was Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. And then you have World War II occur and all of the atrocities that occurred there. But again, like, New World Order conspiracy theory kind of goes back to that. And that's why it's so often linked to like Jewish conspiracy theories and like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of like Jewish control of the media and banking and whatever. It's all tied in here because, like, that's where it started.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's really interesting too is that it's H.G. Wells who also came up with the phrase, or was one of the ones accredited to coming up with the phrase of the New World Order, which was the title of his treatise, which was published a year after the outbreak of World War II. Right. And again, Wells is advocating that nation states come together and work together to prevent further violence, right? Like, clearly warring nations is destabilizing. We need to be able to come together to create peace. But even in that act, again, like, that was what he was calling the New World Order. And that immediately is met with, mistrust. Which, even if I think that's always like the problem with this is the most, like, I think the idea of, hey, we need to come together to prevent further violence is a pretty benign proposition, right?
You think
like,
so?
On the surface, it is a pretty benign thing. Like, it makes a lot of sense, but there's a lot of other currents happening that could, can make that look a different way.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into those after the break.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from M-Files, helping knowledge workers discover the smarter way to work from anywhere. The M-Files metadata-driven document management platform helps knowledge workers find the right information right when they need it, no matter what it is or where it's saved. Start accessing information instantly, so there's more time to do work that matters. Discover more at m-files.com.
This episode is brought to you by HP. When you're working apart from your team, feeling connected can be a challenge. Presenting HP Presence, a more thoughtful, human collaboration technology. With enhanced audio and video features, you can experience more genuine collaboration and feel more connected. Be in the room from any room with HP Presence. Learn more at hp.com/presence.
And we're back now. Okay, so, like Marie said, after World War II really leads to kind of an intensification of a lot of this talk about needing an international group. Because again, World War I happens, they try the League of Nations, it doesn't really work. And then World War II happens, and they're like, oh crap, that thing would have been great. Right? And
the thing that we decided to disband, that could have helped us.
Well, and not only that, right? But imagine being someone in like a surrounding country, or imagine being like, first off, I can't even imagine what it must have been like to have lived through World War II and then see the results of your inaction. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so like, I mean, we're kind of going through something. And again, not the same scale, but something similar now with like Ukraine. We went through it with Syria. We went through it with Afghanistan. Like name every one of the conflicts, Iraq, right? But it's like you see this stuff happening, and it kind of just becomes like daily. Just every day. It's other people in power doing this stuff, right? And so then when kind of the horror of what happens in these situations really comes home to roost, I think for a lot of people, it's a lot better to be able to say, this is the fault of the politicians and not the fault of the people who let the politicians get away with it. Right? Or do what they do.
Well, yeah. And I think it's hard. It's always easier to look back on this, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Again, the creation of NATO, right? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? I think I got that. Yeah, NATO, right?
Doing great.
Was a good idea after World War II because there was this idea of this need that they have to balance, something's going to have to balance out the rising Soviet power, right? Clearly, there's going to be, we can't make the same mistakes that we made with Germany.
Yes. So
we need to put something in place that is going to be a balancing mechanism, and that's NATO, right? So America and Europe agree to a mutual defense pledge, right? That we are going to, if we are attacked by one, all will respond. We will advance democracy, rule of law, and human rights, and at the same time also be opening up to international economy. So it's Absolutely. Again, it's sort of this idea of not just working towards peace, but achieving sort of this financial stability between the two companies. Well, they're pretty much countries to keep them balanced. To keep the scales balanced with something that could be a potential threat. And that, again, like you kind of see how that's playing out now with Ukraine, right? It's like, again, you are hearing about, well, how close are they getting to Poland? What is, what are the steps that we take that are considered, right up to the red line, but not over it? Because if it becomes over, it then it's not just our commitment; it is the commitment of the full of NATO, which is again, I don't think it's overstating it would probably be World War III. So that's sort of a really it's easy to kind of see those things in hindsight. It's harder to see in current day what's happening and how do you prevent that in the future. And I can also understand, like, again, the creation of NATO. If you were in the Soviet Union and you see, again, you're trying to refortify yourself, but then you see the rest of the world, or a good portion of the rest of the world, begin to ban to balance you out. That is, again, you're creating a tension by trying to create that balance.
And it creates sort of an interesting case too, where not, again, because like NATO isn't, like Marie said with Russia right now, right? NATO is not just the scope of what NATO can do to a country that seemingly like steps out of line. It's pretty all encompassing, right? Mm-hmm. Because think about it. You can shut down basically a country's entire economy. You can militarily destroy them, right? Mm-hmm. In theory. You can culturally isolate them. If you're thinking about this in terms of like civilization, right? Like the video game, NATO is kind of like it's the card to play, right? You can destroy them with culture. You can destroy them with economy. You can destroy them with military. You can destroy them with even with like religion in some ways, right? Like the Pope is condemning, Russia and whatever. Like, so it really has a important, again, like it has good reason for existing. I think a lot of us would say like, yes, those things should probably exist. Like, it's great that there's a way for countries to work out these problems without resorting to military violence, And I think a lot of people would argue that NATO, the United Nations, the other groups that came about after NATO's creation are one of the reasons why there has not been kind of a world all-encompassing war for the last, since World War II. But like Marie said, for people on the outside, right? People on the outside, it starts to look like, well, wait a second. Where are their tendrils? How deep into our economy are they? Yeah. How deep into our culture are they? How deep into our media are they? Right? It starts to become this very, again, because the power of kind of the world being against you is pretty, pretty strong. It's really easy to see this group as maybe using its powers for bad, right? Or for evil or whatever.
Yeah.
And these organizations, like I think before these sorts of organizations happened, the idea of a new world order, like the Illuminati or whatever, it was a bunch of like, it was a bunch of weirdos hanging out in someone's parlor in Paris. And that's what people thought of conspiracy theories then. After NATO, after World War II and the League of Nations and all of the history there, it started being, no, these are political elites, cultural elites, economic elites deciding what is right for us. Because if we don't comply, then they can destroy our way of life.
Well, and I think the thing that you can't undervalue literally is, that alliance was the basis for like a lot of international institutions around banking, right? So the World Bank was founded because of that, which is a huge, again, it's like, it is one of the key instruments that was used to, refortify NATO and weaken to the point of disintegration the Soviet Union, right? Is you have financial backing and you have financial clout. So you've got these massive global organizations that are controlling on a lot of part, to your point, like you were saying, the fact that they can turn off an entire country is a pretty big weight on anybody's head, because you're making decisions about the best interests of humanity, right? Yeah. It's not just, it becomes sort of that abstract, and it's a good thing when it's promoting like peace, democracy, and stability, but it can be used exactly the opposite way.
It's a good thing when it's promoting things that you agree with.
That's exactly right.
And
That's
that's
exactly
that's
right.
the turn that conspiracy theorists take, is they say, well, who gets to decide what is right for me? Who gets to
Yes.
decide what is correct? And again, we go back to the kind of moral arguments we had at the beginning of the season, right? Like that's really where it comes into play. And so what you really find is people who it's ideologues who push these things, you know? And so you have things like, so after World War II, people start making arguments that, well, wait a second, if my ideology goes against the prevailing notion of the UN or these other countries or whatever, then they might be able to stop me. And that is, and it really is like a global effort to stop them, right? So like a good example of that is, say, Brexit. Yeah. I find Brexit fascinating, by the way. So listeners in the UK, if you have like good sources and stuff that you suggest for me, please send them over.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm getting
Brexit is
through
fascinating.
my secret Brexit diary, which was translated into English a couple of months ago. I'm finally getting to go through it. It's fascinating stuff. But like Brexit is a really good example of that, right? Why did the United Kingdom want to separate from the European Union? It was because they felt like the European Union, or at least this is the argument, they felt like the European Union was Europeanizing of the UK. Right?
Europeanizing.
That they were losing their culture, they were losing their economy, they were getting too caught up in this global thing and no longer being able to decide for themselves what was important, because all these other countries now have a say at the table, because if they don't agree with us, they can destroy us. Right? We've given them the power to destroy us.
Which also speaks to sort of, again, innate colonialism. Right?
Absolutely right.
You've got to point that. Like, that's like, you're only thinking of that. You're only having that opinion
Because
about
you did
things because you did that, and because you are because you can't imagine any other position. You can't imagine the compromise.
Yeah.
Which is not. I don't think that is universally true of the UK. I think that can be weaponized, you know, like and I do think that was weaponized with Brexit. Like,
oh, absolutely. Well, and we have those arguments in the United States too, right? So like, for example, Marie, here in the show notes, you say one of the earliest warnings about the New World Order was fears about the United Nations making America too European or getting rid of American exceptionalism or whatever, right? Or like, you know, during the Cold War, right, the John Birch Society argued against the New World Order, that it was not NATO that was the New World Order, but it was the Soviets. It was the communists who had the New World Order, right? Or today, right, it's in the 90s, Pat Robertson, who like is not politically powerful or important or whatever. I mean, he's important, I guess, to some people, but you know.
Well, in the 1990s he was, right?
Oh,
He's
sure,
got money.
sure.
He's got a megaphone.
Yeah. He argued that, and this is, again, one of the first, not the first instance where American right-wing political ideology will use this thing, because again, like, it's hard to argue, like the John Birch Society is clearly like a conservative think tank, right? Or whatever you would call it. But it's hard to argue that meant the same thing as it does today after, you know, when they were fighting against like the Soviets, right? But Pat Robertson, like, I guess I would say Christian fundamentalist religion and republicanism, that brand of Christian fundamentalism that's politically motivated. This is kind of one of the first cases where they start to get into the fray here, with Pat Robertson arguing that essentially they were using world government to take away your guns.
Oh yeah.
And that after they take away your guns, then they can take away your religion. Then they can take away your, I don't know, whatever the hell Pat Robertson else was saying, you know, but that's like, that's where it comes from, right? That that's how it starts to morph into this sort of right wing more view that we today think about. Right. Yeah. But before that, New World Order conspiracies were like, you were just as likely to hear that the government was coming for your, you know, your acid, because they were run by a bunch of, you know, Republicans or whatever, conservatives, as you were to hear that it's a bunch of crazy Democrats coming for your guns, you know?
Yeah. I think the 90s is also when you see Waco, you see Ruby Ridge and Waco. Yep. And then after that, McVeigh, which was the detonating the bomb on the federal building in Oklahoma, which basically he used to simplify. Well, it was a pretty simple plan. Symbolize government overreach, right? So again, it's you see acting out against symbols of government control, and not just government control, but sort of this idea of control. And it really feeds into the idea of like, this is the new world order. Like you're systematically rebelling against the new world order. Yeah. And of course we couldn't go through something with a new world order without talking about my favorite and yours. Yes, indeed. The man who sells those, the terry cloths and gold and whatever else he's panning for. Oh, wait, he's not panning for any of that now because he poor. Alex Jones.
They're turning the frogs gay.
I know. They're turning the frogs gay.
Hate him. Yeah, no.
Right?
So Alex Jones, there was a time where Alex Jones became famous because of Jade Helm.
Oh, yeah.
Which listeners don't know if you remember Jade Helm. It was a little conspiracy theory that basically the military, the U.S. military, was doing these drills for when they finally were going to take over the world, or they were going to take over America. They were going to come for people's guns. They were going to go move us to a cashless society or something crazy. And yeah, the whole thing was they were doing like military drills in Texas, and he was certain that it was going to lead to world government, and it didn't.
Unfortunately, no.
Another famous Alex Jones bad take.
Oh my God. But so, yeah, you can see how it plays out again. It's just iterative, right? It's this perfect blanket conspiracy theory that can be applied to any situation. It really is like the lens in which you can distort any kind of event.
Yes.
Even one is like, hey, the globe is just trying to balance itself, balance its world powers, balance its government control, balance its finances. The intent is not to do harm. Then that is absolutely what gets turned on its head. This is definitely like, that's of course what they would say, that's what they want you to believe. Sheeple.
Right. Sheeple. And what's I think so interesting too, is so we kind of tracked here in this episode how the New World Order conspiracy theory that you probably, it's like, because again, the New World Order conspiracy theory, like we said, it's really varied. There's lots of different permutations to it, but this is kind of like your bread and butter New World Order conspiracy theory, right? This is the one that, like, if you think about New World Order conspiracy theories, this is the one. These are the facets you're thinking of, right? But it's easy to see though too how in other countries or in other places maybe, what is meant by New World Order conspiracy theories or these sorts of conspiracy theories changes a lot, right? So you can imagine if you're in North Korea, you've been taught that it's not your government that's doing these things to you or controlling you or whatever. You've been taught that this is all America with spies in North Korea destroying and changing your country. Yeah. And I mean, there's an argument to be made about like how effective that is or whatever with reality and everything else. But you can imagine like in Russia, their take on New World Order conspiracy theories is likely that it's America that is the one pulling the strings.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so it's just a very interesting, again, like Professor Sue says, it's a lens through which to see history.
Yes.
Oh boy, Marie. Well, I think the funniest thing by far is so it all comes down to this airport because of that capstone, really, because of that stupid name that they chose.
Yes.
And what's fascinating is the most important member of the committee was a man named Charles Ansbacher, who was an arts advocate in the area.
Yeah, and we discussed him in our first episode. Again, a fascinating man.
And what is so funny is, like, he's pretty sure he's the one that made the name up. And so what's really funny is he's like, man, oh my God, right? And so he says he guesses that the name that he took likely comes from Dvorak's New World Symphony. And so they wanted it to represent that the airport was not the newest in the world, but it was the newest airport in the New World. It was the first one built in the Americas, or in North America, since 1973.
Yeah, which is pretty amazing.
Which is crazy to think about, but very interesting, right? And so he says here, and I think this is the perfect quote to end the episode on.
Yes.
The idea that there is anything secretive about this is totally preposterous. Couldn't have said it better myself, Charlie.
I know. And on that note of reason, they're after us.
That's it, listeners. We hope you enjoyed this series on the Denver International Airport. Again, at the center of these conspiracy theory nuggets, when we get down to them, a lot of the times it's something silly like this, right? It's just
It's silly,
stupid.
or even worse, uninteresting.
well,
Mundane, right? Not
Hopefully
that what we just
hopefully a little
discussed was
interesting.
uninteresting, because you should be giving us 5 stars and be fascinated what's coming up next on Mad Scientist. But that the mundane can still breed crazy shit.
Absolutely. All right, listeners, we love you so much. Thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at Mad Scientist Pod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.
All right, so I get a little.
I'm feeling the meat. It's great.